I've represented Team USA at 2 Olympic Games, the Winter Games in 2002 in Salt Lake City, and the Summer Olympics in Beijing, China in 2008. I have over 30 years in collegiate athletics, including time in the Pac-10 or Pac-12, whatever you want to call it, or the Pac-nothing now, at Little Washington State University. And that was my first job after I completed my doctoral work. And I'll never forget that trip out to Pullman, Washington, and my colleagues saying, "Wow, you're going to be at Washington State, that's awesome, Seattle's so beautiful." And I would say, "Yeah, that's where University of Washington is at." And the first coach I met at Washington State, right on cue, when he introduced me, said, "So you're our new shrink?" And I said, "No, coach, I'm your new stretch." And that was kind of started my journey. So you can see all the different places I've been involved in the collegiate spectrum and the professional sports space. Baseball for 5 years with the Kansas City Royals, back in the MLS when it started. Indiana Fever for 10 years. And then 2 NBA teams over a 13-year spread. And then out of the blue in 2017, I get a call from Gray Rugemer, the director of player engagement for the Packers. And that began this journey of my now going into my 7th year with the Green Bay Packers. And to consider that a blessing to be the first full-time psychologist developing a performance psychology program in the most storied franchise in the NFL is like a perfect, not hopefully last chapter, but perfect end of the chapter in my career. I've done work with U.S. Navy's Officer Candidate School and have had leadership positions in the past. So it's really a diverse career. I played college football in a Division III school in Indiana. I coached college football at Ball State University in the Mid-American Conference. I worked with college teams at Washington State when Drew Bledsoe was still playing. Ohio State, when Eddie George won a Heisman Trophy. But boy, it's just different. It's different here at this most elite level of athletic competition. And that kind of ties in a little bit about my role as a psychologist. This idea of performance psychology, and they say the director of performance psychology for the Green Bay Packers. Why do we use that title instead of director of mental health or director of mental wellness? Because in the NFL, everything in these young men's life is about performance. Everything. Their families, their relationships, their self-esteem, their self-efficacy, everything is tied in to their performance on the field on Sundays. Whether it's here in Lambeau or in some of those other cities in the north that you don't like to speak about. And yes, you can kind of grow that NFC North displeasure of other teams. Performance psychology as a discipline within the psychology field has kind of come to light in the past 25 years. And these are some descriptors that really tie into the work that I do. We're not afraid to talk about being excellent. We're not afraid to talk about being elite, being at the best of your ability. Not being perfect. The game in sport is not perfect. Life is not perfect. But to strive to be your best performer is part of our goal, and that's to give our players tools to work on that mental side of performance. The performance often occurs in front of others, and yeah, there's 80,000 there in Lambeau, and it's pretty cool. But every mistake you make is in front of others. And now with the increase of social media, you've got others in a whole different dimension. And so knowing how to navigate that, but as performers, that's the key. And you have to meet certain standards. As we go through this draft process now, I talk to a lot of young men who've had wonderful collegiate athletic careers, and some of them will not ever play a snap in the NFL. Because performance isn't at the level that's required for the position or the place that they're going to play. That's just a reality, but as you move up an elite level, it gets a little bit more specific, and you have to have a certain skill set. You've got to be able to use those skills at a certain point in time. Like when you have to do a presentation to a large group of people, you have to be ready. A month ago, I was not ready. Oh, as a side note, on February 7th, I had my wrist repaired and my right tibia repaired from a ladder fall. And I went surgery, a freighter, and now I'll be setting off metal detectors in airports as I move ahead. A month ago, they might have had to wheel me out here, but I'm proud to say I'm on my second day of walking, and so far it's going well. That's consequences of poor performance on a ladder. It was not intentional, but as I was told in a very sympathetic way by my colleagues, you need a ladder guy. So I'll be hiring soon. You gotta have good coping skills, and this is kind of the domain of performance. Now, when I worked with the U.S. Navy in their Office of Canada, they have to perform. When I was at Arizona State University and consulted with the School of Music, to do an audition for a symphony orchestra is an incredibly stressful environment. You better have some skills to manage that, because when it's time, you have to perform. And when you're a wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers and you run a route and you get separation and our quarterback gets the ball to you, you gotta catch it. You gotta catch it. And you gotta be able to perform in that moment. So this performance psychology field kind of brought me in. Now, truth be told, 40 years ago I worked in inpatient drug and alcohol treatment. And I worked in the addictions field for 4 years. And it was challenging and demanding, and substance dependence is an incredibly scary disease. But I needed to find my niche, and I've been fortunate to find it for this past 30 years. With the Packers, we define mental health based on the World Health Organization's description of mental health. For those psychology folks that are interested, many, many years ago, psychology truly was evolved as a field with 3 specific goals. Number 1 was the identification and treatment of mental health disorders, like mood disorders, anxiety disorders. That was really kind of an emphasis of psychology. Other 2 purposes of psychology years ago was identifying talent in multiple domains and making life better, improving life. Now, what happened to the transition? World War II happened. And our veterans come home with significant psychological and emotional damage. And so the focus of funding and everything was about treatment of mental health care, which isn't a problem. We need to have that. And one of the things that's been very true is we haven't lost the focus on mental health. So our rookies that will be coming in here in a couple of weeks, when I do my introduction, we talk about this is our description of mental health. It's not just the absence of mental illness, it's a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, optimal ability, can cope with the normal stresses of life, along with extra normal stresses of being in a performance domain, can work productively and fruitfully, which in our world is, as Brian Gutekunst has so clearly said, we don't hang banners for divisions in Green Bay. We want to hang bigger banners. Super Bowl is always a target goal. No problem with that. Just like the recent men's basketball that ended, when you start the NFL playoffs, there's 14 teams and 1 team ends happy. And when the men's basketball tournament started, there were 68 teams and 1 team ended happy. And having worked with Coach Maynor and Purdue for many years, I was hoping to be the Boilers. So we learned this is part of this dynamic. You gotta work at that time and be able to make a contribution to the community, which is so phenomenal about Rotary clubs and what they do in the community. It's awesome. I've had opportunities in the past with Kiwanis and other opportunities to speak, but being able to come here into the Green Bay community is helpful, because as I shared earlier, I typically go from home to Lambeau, and that's about it. I didn't know Main Street Bridge was closed until I got on the other side of it. Fortunately, I knew how to get here. How do we see our players? As either having mental health difficulties or diagnoses or not? No, we see our athletes, and I know you're not going to be able to see this, but understand, we see a continuum of psychological health with anybody. That as you bring an athlete in who is physically at their highest level, they are fast, they are strong, they are athletically gifted, they have talents and skills, they have the intelligence to play the game, and they can measure out at one end of that spectrum where they're an elite NFL athlete, period. But if they twist their leg up for a certain way, or they get rolled up in a pile and they tear an ACL, they're going to move down that continuum. It was an event that happened to them that caused that disorder. it's not a comparison kind of where you had two dimensions of either they're healthy or not healthy. It's we're on a dimension. So is our psychological and emotional health. When a player loses a family member, I'm reaching out. When a player is injured, I am part of their rehab. And believe me, my empathy scale has increased greatly over this past 3 months. That isolation, that being dependent on someone else, the immobility, the pain, yeah, I can talk about it, and now I know. And that's something that I can help, and some players have reminded me it's a skill set that I've added, unfortunately through a way I chose not to add. We treat our players along a continuum. They are young men, and they are open to criticism. I mean, the stuff that I get shown on social media that's directed at these individuals, shocking. But they understand that's part of this job. It's part of being in this performance business. So they accept it. Now we teach them how to learn to manage it and focus on things that they actually control. We do proactive care. We're not waiting for the depression to occur. My position is to develop a program. We have strength and conditioning. We have sports medicine, athletic training. We have sports nutrition. We have our player engagement staff. Now we've just added the psychology piece, the performance psychology piece. So these are a few examples, kind of how we tie that together. If players meet with me individually, it is confidential. Yeah, right, it's confidential in an organization. No, it's part of my contract. With the NFL, it's my contract. That as a licensed psychologist, individual work I do with players is confidential. Now, communication is important, but you have to navigate that process. And to the credit of the organization, it's never been challenged. Coaches know better than to ask me, what are you guys talking about? All they want to know is, how are they doing, and how can I help? So we're trying to create a culture and educate our coaching staff, work integrated with our medical staff, and really provide an emotional and psychological care basis, the best of all resources. So I wanted to clarify that because when they come in and shut the door in my office, that's confidential. Now, we do a class every week. We call our mindset class. Yes, I'm losing track of days. Wednesday, when we had our first class, we had 16 players. This is all voluntary. In the NFL, nothing can be mandated. You cannot mandate counseling. College athletics, a lot of these young men get mandated to go see a therapist because they had a positive drug test or they maybe had a behavioral episode. They have to get mandated. In the NFL, you cannot do that. So it's all voluntary. So what we want to do is create a space where players see this as an asset, as a strength. And it's particularly for men, which is difficult to be communicative, specifically about emotional issues. We want to create a space for that. Last year, 68% of our active roster utilized me on an individual basis. So we're growing. And that's about issues in their life and stress management and performance issues and building confidence. So we get a class because Classway is a great way to teach. The night before games, we do a focus session, which is basically a fun guided imagery exercise. Get them all in a room with pillows and sweats and let them get some clarity. Let them get some calm. Let them get a focus on what they're going to do the next day. And we all hear about things like visualization, imagery. We make it as part of their routine. I have a bulletin board. We use every access to create. And then in December of 22, we built a meditation room. Meditation in football doesn't make sense. But boy, when you start teaching your mind and your body how to work together, you become a much better football athlete. Because if your mind gets ahead of you, where your body is at, you're going to increase the likelihood of mistakes. And if the body has arousal and attention and energy that the mind is not encapsulating or able to process and focus, you're going to make mistakes. So we're teaching them about mindfulness and meditation. And it's cool as anything because you'll see sometimes in pregame warm-ups some of our players sitting under the goalpost doing their reflections. This room creates a space. It's very zen. It's really cool. We put put it together, and we're getting utilization. We're gonna create tools and places for our players to take time, to reset, to refocus, and gain that self-awareness. The mental skills piece, the sports psychology piece, that's part of my toolbox. That's why, as a psychologist, I wanted to train in that area, so I had those tools to be able to utilize with our players. So goal setting, emotional regulation, visualization, concentration skills, pre-performance routines. These are all cognitive behavioral therapies, but they're also utilized in a performance domain. So as a psychologist, that's a skill set that I can bring in that maybe the other professionals in the building don't have that access. And then the mental health issues, we have a community resource. We have clinicians in the community that specialize, and so players know they don't have to come talk to the old white guy if they don't want to. But if they just say, I would feel more comfortable talking with someone else, then I vetted that out, so that person's not asking for autographs or tickets or signed jerseys. I have to be very careful because I have to protect our players. As I said, I'm integrated, so if you look on the website or you look on a player program, I'm under medical. The Packers will put their licensed professionals under medical. And we have a mental health and wellness team that meets once a month. That's our head strength coach, our head athletic trainer, our director of rehab, our director of security, myself, our head internal team physician, and we have a team that meets once a month, just to monitor to make sure we're handling the situations that may be present, something that we may see out there. We have a mental health emergency action plan that I've had to access 2 times in my 6 years here, where we've had a player in distress. And we have a plan, and we talk about the plan, and we role play the plan, so that we're able to access and provide that player the best level of help. And our integrated resources in the community are key to that process. They're especially essential. We do injury update meetings. As I said, I'm part of every player's rehab. We did a support group a few years ago. We had a number of players on IR that were not going to be coming back for the season, so we got them together. And it was such a powerful support system for these players to have. Because the isolation, not feeling part of the team, anytime I felt when you're not able to engage at the level and the specific tasks that you have to accomplish, there's an isolation. We want to make sure we don't lose them, we bring them back in. I'm at every practice. I'm on the sidelines of games. I travel. It is integrated. It is 7 days a week, starting July 18th. But as Mark Twain said, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And that's where I found my blessing. And I achieved my performance goal because I'm at the last minute on my last slide. So for me, you don't know how big of I've done lots of presentations before, and when I do it with my colleagues, they're like, they sit with a gong in the front row because they know I can get going. So, but I wanted to introduce you to the program here. In 2019, the NFL mandated in the last collectively bargained agreement, every NFL team must have a designated team clinician. There are some teams that bring a clinician from the community into the cafeteria and put him at a table 2 half days a week. They are meeting the minimum standard. 7 teams have made this a full-time commitment. Kansas City, us, I like to say us in Kansas City, but Kansas City beat us by a few runs, going full-time. And then the Giants, the Bills, the Commanders, the Ravens, and the Bears. And they really need it, for sure. Not that I have any, bias in the NFC North. Carr is a good friend and colleague. 7 of us have become full-time in this role, and I think that's going to be the trend. That's a trend that's happening in the NBA, and Major League Baseball is continuing. We're going to see an advent of mental health, but I think what we're also going to see is this incorporation of performance psychology, teaching people how to be effective with goal setting, teaching people how to manage stress, particularly with the increased stressors of social media and all of the other things that change along with us. This has been, for me, just kind of a wonderful journey. Ted Lasso, if you've ever watched the series, is a wonderful series. They engage sports psychology consultants during this process. In fact, there's this episode, if you haven't seen the Dark episode, where Ted is telling the former owner of the team, Walt Whitman's quote, "Be curious, not judgmental." Professional athletes face a lot of judgment. There's a lot of judgment. So my role is to be the curious and interested and supportive and empathic resource for these players to navigate so they become curious about themselves and don't get into the self-judgment that oftentimes disrupts their career. It's an awesome opportunity to be here in front of you and talk a little bit about my role. It's with the Packers. We love having folks in this community. I didn't realize until I started this position full time that I have a lot of friends that a trip to Lambeau is their bucket list item. So we've become the Carr Hotel during season with our friends and family, which is just awesome to have them be part of a football Sunday at Lambeau. So I hope you have a wonderful conference. Appreciate the invitation to be here. Wish you all the best in all of your communities and as you move forward in your businesses and careers. Thanks so much.